The session today is being presented by myself, Rebecca. I am the project manager for the Inclusive Arts Project. I am Australian born, but I grew up and did all of my schooling and education in Japan, and I speak Japanese. I am both ADHD and autistic myself, and I am a parent to ADHD and autistic children. My co-facilitator today is Dr. Madhumita, who is joining us from India. Dr. Madhumita, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks for including me in this. I'm Madhumita. I'm Indian by birth, but Australian by citizenship. I moved to Australia in 2000, so it's 26 years back. Since I have moved to Australia, I had been working in the public service because I am trained as an economist, and I worked in the Federal Department of Treasury, Finance, Defense, Health, and different other departments for the last 25 years. As a senior economic advisor, policy advisor in this kind of professional position. But I, at heart, always remained very committed to the community. So for the more than, since I have arrived in Australia, I had been always connected with the community as a volunteer. And I had been working with different organizations as a volunteer. My advocacy been centered around women empowerment and advocating for the rights and well-being of the marginalized communities. So I founded an organization in 2013, which is known as Initiatives for Women in Need, or IWIN, where we are absolutely inclusive. And since 2013, we are operating IWIN as an inclusive organization, working on women well-being, but open to all. I mean, inclusive in terms of gender, inclusive in terms of minority groups, people with disabilities. So everyone, though our focus is on well-being of women, because we believe that when we look at women well-being, it cannot be isolated. The all of the communities have to come together to make it realized. Other than that, I had been also the chair of Canberra Multicultural Community Forum, which is the peak body of ACT, all ACT, like 110 plus multicultural community organizations in ACT. And currently I'm serving in the board of ACT COS, which is ACT Council of Social Services. So I'm very committed to community, any issues that affect community well-being, particularly members of the communities who need particular help or where they need their need are not being, for example, the disability sector, where people have a bit of lack of understanding how to include them, how to be inclusive in their actions, in their events, or in their policy framework. Because my passion is in developing policy, implementing policy, assessing policy for betterment. So that's me. And Yeah, and thank you to Rebecca. I'm also in the board of this advisory group that Rebecca is working on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Madhumita. Now that we have introduced ourselves, I would like to start off by acknowledging that we are all participating from different parts of this great country, and that we are all living and working on unceded land. I myself am coming from Ngunnawal country, and I pay my respects to Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging, both from here in Ngunnawal country and of all of the countries from which you all join me today. I also acknowledge any Indigenous or First Nations people here with us today. If you would like to, please drop whatever country you are coming from in the chat. As mentioned, today's session is around the inclusive entry points for the Inclusive Arts Project's practice framework. There is a copy of the practice framework in the invite that you received for this session. If you have downloaded or had a look at that since prior to maybe about 2 or 3 hours before this session, please have a look. There is an updated version in there. So the objectives of the session today are to understand and apply the first section of that framework and to reflect on the biases that impact participation and inclusion of culturally, linguistically diverse people of disability within the arts. The Inclusive Arts Practice Framework. So what is it? The framework itself was developed to inform the practice of developing and implementing inclusive arts programs within the community, clearly. And it was developed by NEDA through a co-design process of a panel of culturally, linguistically diverse people with disability or advocates who are artists and who work within the sector. So, for example, Dr. Madhumita here is on our co-design panel as one of our culturally, linguistically diverse experts, and we have a number of other representatives from each participating state and territory who have also been a part of that co-design panel. We used their contributions and their lived experience to inform and direct us in terms of the development of the framework and around the gaps and barriers that are experienced not just by culturally, linguistically diverse people, not just by people with disability, but in that intersectional space of both. It was developed, and it's important because there are gaps in that community and systemic participation of culturally, linguistically diverse people with disability, especially in comparison to mainstream participation. And the intention is to ensure that they are empowered and to participate more by ensuring that the spaces that they would be participating in are culturally appropriate and accessible and inclusive for them. It's fairly common knowledge out there that while approximately 50% of the population of Australia have at least one parent who was born overseas, we also have extremely high numbers of people, Australians, who do not necessarily speak English as their first language at home either. We note that there are approximately 20-25% of Australians who identify as having a disability. But that number drops when it comes to the number of people that we know to, for example, be participants of the NDIS. Further to this, we can also see that in that space where people identify both as culturally, linguistically diverse and as people with disability, that participation drops much, much lower than we would expect given participation percentages of other groups. This is a graphic highlighting the various components of the Inclusive Arts Practice Framework. So the framework itself, as you can see, is made up of a number of concentric circles. The outermost circle, covering all elements of the framework, is around and about those inclusive entry points. So the inclusive entry points refer to the attitudes, the ethics, the moral stance, the ethics and the attitudes that dictate how we support and include people. Now, this particular graphic, once we have passed through those inclusive entry points, those attitudes, and yes, as Ash has stated, the ethos of inclusion and accessibility in this space, we move on to the enabling environments, because we do know that the environment needs to be accessible and inclusive. Our processes, moving on to our processes, once we have viewed all of those through the lenses of the outer layers, it should filter down into and the end result should be an inclusive arts program. So today's webinar does focus on that first layer, the inclusive entry points, the key components, the values, the skills, and the knowledge that are crucial at the beginning of the development of any inclusive arts program. Now, Dr. Madhumita, would you like to speak to the next section? Yes, please.
The word cloud, yeah, I'm actually fascinated by the way you have brought it, Rebecca. I'm sure all of the participants would. This is an activity, word cloud activity with a QR code. So what things do you consider important for inclusion in the arts, like, values, systems, processes? So could you please grab your phone and use the QR code on the screen? The QR code is visible to you all. Can you do that, please? And add a word that represents what you think is important for culturally and linguistically diverse people with disability and inclusion in the arts.
Thank you. I'd like to ask, sorry, Dr. Madhumita, if I could just interrupt just briefly. If I could ask that people do one word at a time, but you can do as many words as you would like.
I was just thinking that, I would give little time and then,
Yes,
so
absolutely. Everybody is welcome to spend as much time as they need doing so. If you can see the screen now, you will see the responses, the word cloud starting to populate with the various responses we are receiving as we go along.
So Rebecca, then you can explain the, some of the common words that is coming out from this word cloud, I guess, and then you can explain also the main components of this inclusive entry points.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What are the words you think are coming out as the most common?
Oh, so I can actually see some really good words coming out in that space. Empathy, trust, respect, and
Mhm.
these are some really, really great words
Yeah,
here.
absolutely. That reminds me, actually, there is a global empathy conference which happens every year. And I'm a part of this conference also. So, yeah, so this is a
Thank you.
very good word, very strong word in terms of inclusivity.
I like that empowerment, dignity have come out, belonging, safety, and these are all
Mhm.
some really, really important words in this space. So if you note from that word cloud before, we had words such as safety, representation, uh, accessibility, voice, um, all coming through there in that word cloud. So if you consider it, all of those can be grouped into a few main components. The framework itself has grouped all of those into a section called inclusive entry points at that layer of the graphic there. So these components they can all be broken into one of those four sections of that we have broken the inclusive entry points down as. So first of all, lived experiences knowledge, where we recognise and value the cultural and the disability identities as sources of knowledge. So we avoid tokenism by integrating that lived experience into the decision making processes. And we try and do so early and often so that we know that we are listening to the people that we are trying to support and include, and we are understanding where they are coming from, and we are not allowing them a voice. We are recognizing that their voice has equal importance in this process. Obviously, some in that section there, you might find that things like that co-design where it came into it, or respect, dignity, voice, all of those can be included in that section of lived experience as knowledge. The next section, which is on that critical reflection, as a part of our attitudes and that inclusive entry point, we do need to reflect on our personal biases, our privileges, and our own identities,
Mm.
whatever they may be. We do need to review the accessibility and the inclusion of our organisation and our previous programs and learn from change and learn from the feedback we've received there. We consider how the choices that we make may be affecting the inclusion in this space. Another crucial element of those inclusive entry points is that we do need to we all need to have that commitment to equity and inclusion. At an organisational level, I believe that everybody here does have that commitment, or you wouldn't be here. We do need to reinforce and consider that ourselves as well at a personal level. We do need to understand that inclusion is a lifelong practice. It requires resilience, responsiveness, and humility. Um, and we do need to stay committed to it through changing challenges. And an important thing here as well is that all of us, regardless of our identities or those biases and privileges, uh, need to stay open-minded, and although it's tempting at times, try not to stay non-judgmental and open-minded throughout the processes. The final and crucial element that has been identified by our co-design group that is crucial for that as part of that inclusive entry point is that healing-centered trauma-informed practice. Is everybody here aware of the concept of trauma-informed practice and trauma-informed care? If not, I definitely recommend that it is something that you do look into because trauma-informed practice is a way of working with people who may or may not have experienced some sort of trauma. It's about understanding how sometimes this trauma does impact the way people interact and how comfortable they feel or how safe they feel to interact or participate. So trauma-informed practice actively challenges systemic harm in terms of racism and ableism and elitism, but it also fosters safety, respect, collaboration, and trust. We do have another activity participation section here. So I'm going to flick back quickly to the word cloud, but I would also like you to have a look here at the workbook that you have and have a look about how and where some of the values from the word cloud might tie in to the values that are the sections of that first part of the workbook there. So I might give just 2 or 3 minutes, just a quick think about how some of these might fit into that section of that first section of the workbook. Because these values, when engaging in art and programming, if you live and put these values into practice, you should be 90% of the way there to being inclusive and accessible. It should result in an inclusive arts practice. As I said before, all of these values, when you're putting them into practice, they should result in an inclusive arts practice, but there are some things that will impact our ability to truly embody our values and our ethics. One fundamental one is, and I've got drum roll here, biases and assumptions. I think everybody would, or most people would know and understand that everybody has personal biases and they will be shaped by our upbringing, our culture, the media we consume, the people we associate with, and our own personal experiences or lack thereof. If we have not had exposure to a particular thing or a particular way of being, there can be biases both for and against those things. A lack, like I said, just to repeat that, a lack of exposure or understanding of something can lead to biases just as easily as extended exposure. Biases can be both, as it says here, unconscious and automatic. They can be conscious and deliberate. They can be both positive or negative, and positive biases can be just as damaging as negative ones. And finally, biases can be individual, organisational, systemic, and cultural. They are not inherently a bad thing, but they are a reflection of the topics around we personally may make snap judgments or assumptions, correct or not. It helps to show us and highlight to ourselves our thought processes and which ways we may automatically, decisions we may automatically jump to based on that inherent learning. So some examples of biases in this space, both cultural and around disability, and there can be a lot of them.
Yeah.
Dr. Madhumita, would you like to talk to this part?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. But before I get into the examples, I just thought I want to share a little bit about my perception about what I have seen. It's that my perception is that actually bias often comes out not from malice, but from unquestioned assumptions, that you just mentioned, which is, shaped by one's backgrounds, cultural or upbringing, or institutional, whatever it is. But that actually makes us imagine who is normal or competent or more Australian than others or leader-like or independent. But the issue is that all these assumptions actually shape hiring decisions, service delivery, policy design, social interactions, leadership opportunities, and safety and belonging. So that's why identifying these assumptions is the first step towards building systems where everyone, whether racialized or living with disability, can participate fully, like what we are calling it as being inclusive. So I just thought I would mention this before I get into the examples of bias. And today, I think we are talking about bias examples from the cultural, that is, racial side, and in the context of disability. So, I'll start with in the context of disability. Again, what I have seen is that one example could be assuming a person with disability needs help without asking. So once you see someone that visibly having some disability, we just jump into conclusion that they need help. It is well intentioned, but it removes the autonomy and reinforces the idea that they are dependent. So that's a bias. Another is quite often it happens because we run a lot of community events. And in ACT, we are fortunate that we have ramps and all. So, we are very inclusive in terms of that we can give that access to people with disabilities. But quite often when a person comes with the help, the companion, so the event organizers or the volunteers, often they start talking to the companion person instead of the person himself or herself. So that's a common bias towards people who use wheelchairs or have some communication differences.
Thank you,
Also,
Doctor. Can I just interrupt there and just reiterate how important that particular example is? In the context of disability, where a person has a support person, it's often important to remember for ourselves that a support person for the person with disability is merely another form of, and I'm trying to find the right words for this, assistive technology. In this case, a human sort of support, but it is, again, a disability support, just as, for example, an assistance animal may be. We would not automatically go to an assistance animal and start talking to the animal about the needs of the person they are supporting. We would not talk to a person with low vision's cane that they were using to navigate around. We would not talk to a wheelchair about someone's needs, and we would not talk to a support person without the direct request and consent of the person with the disability. Sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead, Doctor.
Absolutely. No, you did it very well, Rebecca. Thank you for that. You made it absolutely amply clear that how important it is to talk to the actual person who is attending the event or participating, because they are the main participant, they are the main person. So giving that respect, that's the inclusivity.
And
Giving that
supporting their
respect,
dignity.
recognizing their presence, their individuality. That's the inclusivity. Absolutely, it's important.
Yeah. Thank you,
Another
Doctor.
another is very, very important again, and it happens most of the time, that displacing invisible disabilities, like people having chronic pain, people having mental health conditions or autism or neurodiversity, because they don't look visible, because they are not on wheelchair, or they are not say visibility issue, low visibility, or they cannot hear, they are deaf or something like that. So there is no visible disability, so they are dismissed. So that's again a big mistake that as a community we dismiss. And we need to be aware, and we have to respect, and we also have to inclusive from that context as well. Do you want to expand on this, Rebecca, before I give other examples?
I might just move us along because we are sort of starting to run out of time.
Okay.
But I would also just point out, finally, one final really important bias and assumption that we do need to remember, especially in this context. And Dr. Matamita, you'd probably be able to speak to this as well at some point, but there is a very, very frequent issue that comes up when it comes to people from culturally, linguistically diverse backgrounds, especially where they may not be considered English speakers, and where they have a disability as well.
Yeah. I was going to say that actually, because that's why I said that we'll be covering examples from the cultural side as well as the disability context. So this is that, assuming someone, obviously first generation migrant, including myself, though we live there for long years, we do have accents. And in fact, everyone has accents. Australians will have Australian accent. American will have American accents. British will have British accents. Everybody will have their accents. But what happens is that often people are judged on the basis of their, accents or color of the skin, and they are assumed to be less educated or less able to do certain high-level jobs, in leadership jobs, or more professional, just because maybe they are not conforming to some of the cultural practices, like joining happy hour or something else. So this is, and on top of it, if they have disability, and they have some, say, family responsibilities, carer responsibilities, again that bias comes in, that they are not very professional because they are not taking part. So these are the biases. And of course, as I mentioned about the accent, and also, again, another bias I would like to mention here is that quite often people from minority groups, and particularly people coming from multicultural background, are often picked up to explain racism or represent their entire community. Like you have, say, for example, you have 200 plus multicultural communities in Canberra itself, okay? in the ACT, but it will be picked up only one person as the representative of the group and are expected to represent the entire community, which is impossible because it's so diverse. So these are
Thank you.
again the bias.
That's a really important one, actually, and you will find that advocacy fatigue is what sometimes we call it, and that situation exists where mainstream organizations realize that they do need the voice or the representation of other groups, where culturally, linguistically diverse people, our First Nations people, our people with disabilities, people from other minority groups. They will find one token representative and reach out every single time, and that does get fatiguing. So it is something to be aware of. And just going back to that English proficiency issue, where somebody has both a disability and is culturally, linguistically diverse, especially where English is not their first language, often assumptions are made about either their mental capacity, because their English or their accent may be limited, or there may be assumptions about the lack of English proficiency because of communication issues. Moving on really quickly, and I apologize for because we are running late.
Sorry to interrupt. Just Rebecca, I just want to. I think the opposite also happens. Quite often you hear if someone from the migrant background speaks good English, they are again identified and often remarked as, oh, how you speak good English, from for someone from your background. That bias is also there, that you are not expected to speak good English because you come from certain background.
Not to mention, there is also a cultural erasure. If somebody speaks English with little or no discernible non-Australian accent, there is a tendency to erase their cultural identity because they fit in so well and speak so well. But an understanding of our own biases and examining both of conscious and unconscious bias does help us to know where and how we make assumptions, and it supports our critical reflection and our ability to reflect in a neutral manner, both with emotional intelligence and an openness to critical feedback. So a biased reflection is often really confronting, uncomfortable, and deeply, deeply personal because it is so embedded in our own personal upbringings and experiences. But commentary around unconscious bias is often really contentious because it can sometimes be used as an excuse for poor behaviours. But pointing out biases are not just individual, they are systemically embedded into every level of our daily life, from the laws that govern our land, the policies that shape our institutions, the media we consume, the language we use, and even the design of public spaces and services. There are a lot of non-inclusive bits of language that we use on a daily basis that often we may need to consider whether or not it is appropriate to be using. Some examples: the blind leading the blind, step up to the plate, walking the walk and talking the talk. Some examples of these where people are, that these ones are very much ableist, but there are often similar cultural ones. I won't ask people to share their own reflections, but I do ask people reflect in a personal sense, professional sense, what your actions and go-to assumptions would be in your workplace when considering an individual with participation support needs. we're going to do a case study. I will read this out loud. Please consider what assumptions you make along the way, any snap judgments you might make about this person, and what would your considerations be for them as a participant or an arts facilitator. I will read the case study aloud for anyone for whom that block of text is too much. V is an adult male with significant mental health issues, a history of self-harm, social isolation, hallucinations, and depressive episodes. He struggles with relationships with peers, and he lost his job as a teacher as a result. He has one brother who supports him emotionally and financially, but is estranged from most of the rest of his family. He is deeply passionate about art and nature, and this is his go-to for self-care. He is a prolific creator, but he hasn't been able to turn this into ongoing employment. So considering this particular individual, this case study, is there anyone that would like to share an assumption or a judgment or anything that you may have thought about this particular individual in terms of whether or not he may need increased support if participating? Did you make any assumptions? I am going to move on to the next slide. Now, this and this is a continuation of the case study. Would it change anyone's assumptions or approach if you knew that this man was Vincent van Gogh? The way that society looks at him today is very much at odds with his experiences during life. So there are other biases that can come into play here. He's a famous, prolific artist. He couldn't necessarily need too much in the way of support, could he? But that's not necessarily the case. So yeah, there are a lot of assumptions about capacity that may come into play when you don't necessarily know an individual. But there is also the fact that sometimes people can change their mind because they know of his posthumous success. Despite it being really uncomfortable, it's hugely important to call out and discuss biases, but it's even more important to centre the effects as opposed to the discomfort in talking about it. Biases are not a static thing. They do evolve and they change along with us. There are organisational biases, as mentioned before, that do impact participation and inclusion. So accessibility as an afterthought is an example of organisational bias. So often organisations design and budget for mainstream, and they prioritise maximum participation in numbers, not necessarily in terms of an inclusive environment. So accessibility and inclusion is often a late point add-on or a nice to have. However, accessibility does frequently have the effect of supporting and including much, much more than just the intended targets. So an example of this might be the curb cut effect. Now, the curb cut effect was originally designed, a curb cut is that bit on the edge of a curb where we can go up and down. Dr. Madhumita, did you want to talk about this curb cut effect here?
Yeah, sure. Actually, when we speak about inclusion, one of the most powerful examples we can draw from is the curb cut effect. Curb cuts were first introduced in 1970s in the USA because people with disabilities fought for accessible footpaths. But, they make the curb so that, wheelchair can move easily. But once they were built, everyone benefited. Parents with prams, elderly people, travelers with luggage, delivery workers, cyclists, and so on. So it shows a design that was created for a small group of people, which is the people with, wheelchair. It ended up improving life for an entire, community groups in that city. So this is the essence of inclusive policy. When we remove barriers for those who face the greatest challenges, we actually make society easier, safer, and more productive for all. And this is not the only example. We see this pattern everywhere. Closed captions created for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. But now that help migrants learning English, students studying in noisy spaces, and anyone watching videos on mute. Another example is flexible work arrangements, once considered accommodations, now boost productivity, support parents, and strengthen mental health. Again, another is anti-racism initiatives, which was designed to protect racialized communities of the first generation migrants who have a lack of proficiency in English, the communication, and other cultural adjustments. Those nowadays actually improve the social trust, business engagement, and community cohesion. So the message is very, very clear that actions taken for one group ripple outward with benefits far beyond their original purpose. And that's what the curve effect means. So when we design with the marginalized community groups in mind, we actually build a system that serves the mainstream community too. So inclusion is not a cost or a concession. It's an investment in a society where everyone can contribute, participate, and belong, and definitely can benefit. So I'm just
Thank you.
trying to be very quick, Rebecca, because you are short of time. But if you want me to expand, I can expand on different examples.
Thank you, Doctor. I'll point out electric toothbrushes or even automatic doors are another example of things from the curb cut effect. Originally accessibility or inclusion measures, now they're brought into the mainstream. So tying that all together, and I will just run through this in reflecting on the values and the skills that are important for the programming and reflecting on the biases that might be impacting the implementation of those. The next step is truly to actually consider the practical steps, how those values and attitudes and skills might be incorporated in real life terms. It's nice to feel this way, but we need to show actual impact. So what I will get people to do, if possible, if you do have a chance, brainstorm some of those values and the inclusions and think about how they might be translated. And there is a section in the workbook for this. The next section after you'll find that there is another example of a case study for biases reflection. And after that, there is a section on those practical steps. Things like respect can be translated into practical measures by using inclusive language, such as identity first or person first language, unless identified otherwise. It's actually really difficult because true respect comes from truly believing in the value of the other person. Dignity, strength-based, person-centered approaches. And an example of that, again, is not talking to the support, talking to the person. You assume capacity and not incapacity. and you offer support. You don't assume support. You give choice. You recognise lived experiences. Representation might be recognising lived experiences, knowledge, utilising co-design and co-creation, and voice might be co-design and collaborative planning. So if you can consider some of the different ways that might be incorporated, we will be referring to some of those actual barriers and the practical steps in the next webinar. That exercise, however, might bring to the forefront of your mind that some of the practical measures that you might come up with might not actually be practical for your program or your situation, or there may be barriers to the implementation. So, like I said, next webinar, we'll be reviewing the barriers to an enabling environment, both all structural barriers, organisational and cultural. Just before we leave today, I'd like to have everybody just consider what's something personally that you could do to broaden your own knowledge and understanding of diverse cultures and ways of being. For myself personally, one thing that I do is I do try and catch, I read a lot of foreign or non-Australian literature, and I try as much as possible to watch and consume media in different languages about various different topics, just to try and broaden my own way of my own mind and my own way of being. If anyone would like to share. Doctor?
I actually do, because of my community engagement and because I would like to interact with, I'm a very people's person, so I like to attend different multicultural events and like to know about their culture, their food habits, and different ways of communications, and that's very fascinating. So that's what I like to, that's why I like to expand my knowledge about other cultures and how they like us to interact with them in an appropriate way. That's cultural sensitivity, that cultural appropriateness and cultural sensitivity. And I find it so amazing, like how diverse we are, and we are so rich, culturally rich. Every day, every event I attend, I learn so much.
It would be a waste not to take advantage of all of the different ways of being by learning all about it. I can see that Danielle has suggested that a good thing to broaden your own knowledge and understanding is to volunteer or to chat to people in the street or at the park. The dog park, I find, is a wonderful place to chat and meet new people. Unfortunately, I've only learnt the names of everybody's dogs and not the people that I chat to. So thank you very much. If you've got any questions, like I said, you know where you can find me. I look forward to seeing most of you tomorrow.
So thank you from my side as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Madhumita.
Enjoy your evening. Thank you.